The crypto embezzler. My best friend poisoned me to steal $100 million, thinking the blockchain would hide his crimes. I sat in a dark apartment, 3 monitors casting the only light in the room, and watched a countdown timer on the center screen tick towards 0. 30 seconds. 28. On the secondary monitor, a live Instagram story was playing. A 150-foot megayacht cutting through the Mediterranean at golden hour. Roman standing at the stern in a silk shirt the color of champagne, one arm raised, a bottle of crystal arcing in a long, glittering spray over the water. He was laughing at something one of the women beside him had said, the particular laugh of a man who has decided he will never have to answer for anything he has done. 20 seconds. He had drugged my drink 6 weeks earlier. He had pressed my paralyzed thumb against a biometric scanner while I couldn't speak or move or understand what was happening. He had copied a 24-word seed phrase, wiped the hardware wallet, and pushed me out of a moving car near a hospital emergency room. And then he had sat on a private jet and filmed himself telling me to enjoy the hospital food. He left me with brain swelling, a ventilator, a $200,000 medical bill, and the specific, sickening knowledge that the person you have built your entire adult life alongside is capable of doing all of that to you without a moment of hesitation. 10 seconds. I leaned back in my chair and watched the timer hit 0. But to understand how a man could steal a digital fortune only to find himself trapped inside a floating nightmare with no exit and no allies, we have to go back. Back to the garage, the code, the night it all broke apart, and the day a 10-year brotherhood was exchanged for a string of digits on a hardware device the size of a thumb drive. Roman and I met in our freshman year of college. 2 18-year-olds who had both shown up to the same cryptography elective with the same battered copy of the same text, and recognized in each other the particular kind of obsessive focus that doesn't fit comfortably into most social settings. He was everything I wasn't: loud where I was quiet, instinctively charismatic where I needed to calculate every interaction, the kind of person who walked into a room and made it rearrange itself around him. I built things. He sold them. It was the most functional partnership I have ever known, and for the first 5 years, it was genuinely the best version of either of our lives. We launched our crypto analytics firm out of a rented garage in the spring of our mid-20s. 2 laptops on a folding table, a whiteboard covered in architecture diagrams that filled from floor to ceiling within the first week. The core product was my design, a proprietary algorithmic trading bot that could identify micro-arbitrage opportunities across multiple exchanges faster than any human trader could process the information, executing hundreds of positions simultaneously, compounding returns in the fractions of seconds that exist between the moment a market moves and the moment it corrects. I wrote every line of the underlying engine. Roman built the client relationships, managed the investor calls, and stood at the front of every presentation with the easy, persuasive confidence that I had never been able to manufacture. It worked. It worked in the way that things only work when the timing and the talent and the circumstances align in exactly the right configuration, which is to say it worked in a way that neither of us had allowed ourselves to fully believe was possible, until the numbers became too large to rationalize as luck. The bull run hit at the precise moment our bot's positions were deepest, and we liquidated into a market so favorable it felt almost unreasonable. The final balance landed at just over $100 million, sitting in a joint cold storage wallet secured by a hardware device we kept in a safety deposit box we both had keys to. We were supposed to split it 50-50 and retire before we were 30. We went out to celebrate at a bar downtown that Roman had chosen, high ceilings, low lighting, the kind of place where bottles of scotch cost more than my first car. He ordered for both of us without looking at the menu, which he had always done, and which I had always found more endearing than annoying, because that was the particular texture of knowing someone for 10 years. He pressed the glass into my hand, 18-year-old single malt, and held his own up between us. To us, he said, to all of it, brother. I drank. The first thing I noticed was warmth, which I attributed to the scotch. Then the warmth became pressure, and the pressure became a spreading, crawling wrongness that moved up my arms and into my chest before I had finished processing that something was happening at all. My vision contracted at the edges. The bar noise dropped to a low, distorted hum. I remember reaching for the table and finding it farther away than it should have been. And I remember Roman's face, watching me with an expression I had never seen him wear before, very still, very patient, entirely absent of anything that resembled concern. The alley behind the bar existed in my memory only in fragments. Roman's hand on my arm, moving me rather than supporting me. Cold concrete, the sound of a car door, his voice saying something I couldn't parse into words. My own hand raised and pressed flat against a surface, the hardware wallet's biometric scanner, and the single beep of a successful read, and then a darkness that had nothing to do with the night. I woke up 3 days later in an ICU bed with a ventilator tube down my throat, and a nurse telling me, slowly and clearly, that I had survived severe neurotoxin poisoning, and that someone had dropped me at the emergency room entrance without stopping to speak to anyone. The toxicologist who briefed me on the 4th day, once I could sit up and hold a water cup without assistance, used the word deliberate. The compound in my bloodstream was not something that appeared in contaminated beverages by accident. It required sourcing, preparation, dosage calculation. Someone had administered it to me specifically, in an amount calibrated to incapacitate without killing, which she noted with a clinical detachment that I found almost impressive, required a fairly precise understanding of the target's body weight. My phone was in a bag of personal effects on the bedside table. I had one unread message. Roman was sitting in a leather seat that I recognized as the interior of a private jet, relaxed, one ankle crossed over his knee, holding a glass of something amber. He had filmed himself in landscape mode with the unhurried composure of a man recording a message he had written out in his head beforehand. "Sorry, Kale," he said. Not sorry like a person who was sorry like a person completing a formality. Business is business. I need the whole pie. The cops can't reverse a blockchain transaction. Crypto doesn't work that way, and we both know it. Don't bother filing a report. Enjoy the hospital food. He ended the recording without changing his expression. I put the phone down on the blanket and looked at the ceiling of the ICU for a long time. Not thinking, exactly. More the way a building looks in the seconds after an internal support fails, before the exterior has registered that it is no longer being held up. The detective who came to take my statement on the 5th day was professional and genuinely sympathetic and completely, structurally unable to help me. Cryptocurrency theft existed in a legal gap that traditional law enforcement was not equipped to navigate. No bank to freeze, no transaction to reverse, no centralized authority to compel. The blockchain was the record, and the record was immutable, and the money was gone in every way that law enforcement was currently built to address. She gave me a case number and a card with her direct line, and the look of a person handing you something they know is inadequate. I signed my own discharge papers against medical advice on the 7th day. My legs were functional. My hands had stopped trembling. The headaches were manageable with the medication I had been given enough of to last 2 weeks, which was long enough for what I needed to do. My apartment was exactly as I had left it the night Roman handed me a poisoned drink and smiled while he watched it take effect. I turned on the main server, sat down in front of the monitors, and opened a terminal window I had not accessed in 6 weeks. I typed a single command string from memory and waited 4 seconds for the handshake to complete. Green text resolved on the screen, line by line, in the particular unhurried sequence of a system that had been running exactly as designed without any need for intervention. Proxy wallet status, active, funds mirror, nominal, heartbeat timer, 160 hours remaining, protocol Shiva, armed. I sat back in my chair. The headache was still there, a low pressure behind my left eye that the doctors had told me might persist for months. My ribs ached where I had apparently hit the alley pavement on the way down. $200,000 of medical debt was sitting in an envelope on my kitchen counter that I had not yet opened. None of it mattered in any way that was going to affect what happened next. "You should have killed me, Roman," I said to the empty room. The green cursor blinked back at me, patient and precise, counting down from a number that Roman had no idea existed. The first thing I did before I slept, before I ate anything that wasn't from a hospital vending machine, before I even opened the medical debt envelope on my kitchen counter, was pull up the blockchain explorer and trace exactly what Roman had done with the money. It took 4 minutes. He had moved quickly. The way people move when they are afraid of being caught before they understand that catching them isn't something the existing systems are built to do. The full 100 million had been swept from the hardware wallet into a chain of intermediary addresses within hours of my admission to the ICU. 6 hops through wallets in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their regulatory opacity. Each transaction timed to hit during low monitoring windows. The kind of routing that suggested either Roman had hired sophisticated help or had been planning this considerably longer than the night he handed me that drink. I followed the trail to its current resting point and sat with it for a moment. Then I opened a second terminal and checked something far more important. Here is what Roman did not know, could not have known, because I had never told him, and the code itself was buried in a layer of the wallet architecture that would have required understanding the underlying smart contract logic to locate. And Roman, for all his talent at selling technical concepts to people who didn't understand them, had never actually understood them himself. When I built the joint cold storage wallet 18 months earlier, I did not build one wallet. I built 2. The first was the proxy, the wallet whose address we both knew, whose balance Roman had watched grow for 5 years, whose hardware device he had pressed my thumb against in that alley. It was real in every way that mattered to a person examining it from the outside. It held a perfect mirror of our actual balance. It accepted incoming transactions. It displayed correctly on every blockchain explorer and every portfolio tracker we had ever used. Roman had spent 6 weeks moving what he believed was $100 million through a carefully constructed laundering network. And in a technical sense that was accurate. He had been moving tokens, and those tokens had a face value of $100 million, and every exchange and every intermediary wallet along the route had processed them without flagging anything unusual. What Roman had never tested, because he had no reason to believe he needed to, was whether those tokens would actually convert to anything when he tried to spend them against a real counterparty obligation. The proxy wallet operated on a smart contract I had written myself, embedded in the token logic at a level below what any standard wallet interface would surface to a user. The contract had 2 conditions. The first, any withdrawal attempt above $100,000 would trigger a biometric verification request, routing through a localized scanner that existed only on a device in my apartment. Without that confirmation, the transaction would enter a pending state indefinitely, processing, as far as any external observer could see, but never actually clearing. The second condition was the heartbeat timer. Every 7 days, the contract expected a manual reset signal from my side. If that signal didn't arrive, if I was, for instance, incapacitated on a ventilator, a countdown would begin. At the end of that countdown, Protocol Shiva would execute automatically, without any further input from me, regardless of where I was or what condition I was in. I had named it Shiva after the Hindu deity of destruction, which had seemed appropriately melodramatic when I wrote the code 18 months earlier, and seemed considerably more apt now. Protocol Shiva did 3 things simultaneously. First, it burned the proxy tokens, executing a smart contract function that sent every mirrored token to a provably unspendable address, a cryptographic black hole from which nothing could be recovered or reversed. The proxy balance would drop from $100 million to 0 in a single transaction that would take approximately 4 seconds to confirm on the blockchain and approximately 0 seconds to become permanent. Second, it executed a transfer of the real funds, the actual 100 million, which had never left a cold vault I controlled, which Roman had never known existed, which had been sitting in encrypted storage under my apartment this entire time, into a new private wallet whose seed phrase existed nowhere except in my own memory. Third, it generated an automated report package, transaction logs, IP addresses, device fingerprints, routing metadata, the full chain of Roman's laundering operation across every hop he had made in 6 weeks, and transmitted it simultaneously to Interpol's Cyber Division Financial Crimes Unit, the FBI's Cryptocurrency Task Force, and 3 additional international law enforcement bodies with jurisdiction over the territories Roman had used as routing points. The report would classify the flagged wallet addresses as nodes in an active terrorist financing network, which was the designation that triggered the most immediate international response, and more relevantly for Roman's specific situation, the designation that would generate a red notice within hours rather than weeks. I had not designed Protocol Shiva with Roman in mind. I had designed it because I understood, as the person who had built the underlying trading infrastructure, exactly how catastrophic it would be if our wallet was ever compromised by an external actor. And I had wanted a failsafe that operated entirely outside the control of anyone but me. It had seemed like responsible engineering at the time. It was still responsible engineering. The target had simply changed. By the end of the second week out of hospital, I had pieced together what Roman was doing with the money through a combination of blockchain analysis, social media, and the kind of informed inference that becomes possible when you have known someone for 10 years and understand exactly how their appetites work when the constraints are removed. He had bought the yacht within the first week. I found the registration through a shell company that used an address I recognized as a mail forwarding service Roman had mentioned once, casually, 2 years earlier. He had moved to Monaco, where the combination of warm weather, financial permissiveness, and an established community of people with complicated relationships to regulatory oversight made it the natural destination for a man in his position. And he had, with a speed that suggested either extraordinary confidence or extraordinary recklessness, made contact with a syndicate. The specific organization wasn't difficult to identify once I knew what I was looking at. A blockchain forensics tool I had built for our own trading operation could trace the flow of funds through the public ledger with enough granularity to identify behavioral patterns, the timing of transactions, the size structures, the specific wallets used as intermediaries, and cross-reference them against known profiles in the financial intelligence databases I still had access to through a research subscription that had auto-renewed after my hospitalization. The pattern that emerged from Roman's transaction history over the previous 3 weeks matched, with uncomfortable precision, the documented methodology of a Russian organized crime network that Interpol had been tracking for 7 years without achieving a successful prosecution, largely because their financial operations existed almost entirely in crypto, and their key figures rarely set foot in jurisdictions with extradition agreements. Roman had offered to launder $50 million of their dirty money. I was fairly certain of this, not because I had any direct evidence of the conversation, but because it was exactly what Roman would do. He would walk into a room with the most dangerous people he could find, present them with a number large enough to secure immediate credibility, and trust his own charm to handle everything the number couldn't. He had done a version of this in every investor meeting we had ever run together. The difference was that, this time, the people across the table didn't want equity. He had promised them a $10 million good faith transfer as proof of liquidity. He had a deadline. I knew this because on day 6, 24 hours before the heartbeat timer expired, Roman posted a video to his Instagram story from what appeared to be the yacht's upper deck, a glass of something in his hand, the Monaco coastline glittering behind him in the early evening light. He was talking directly to the camera with the easy, performative looseness of a man who has been drinking since the afternoon. "Big night tonight," he said. "Big moves. Some people thought I wasn't built for this level." A pause, and then a smile I had seen 1,000 times, the one he deployed when he wanted someone to understand they had underestimated him. Some people were wrong. I watched the video twice. Then I turned to the countdown timer on my center monitor, which read 11 hours and 43 minutes, and I made myself a cup of coffee and settled in to wait. The blockchain mempool, the waiting area where transactions sit between the moment they are initiated and the moment they are confirmed on the chain, is visible to anyone who knows how to read it. I had set up a custom alert on Roman's proxy wallet addresses weeks earlier, keyed to notify me the instant any outbound transaction above $1 million entered the pool. At 11:47 p.m., my phone vibrated. $10 million outbound transfer. Destination address matching the syndicate's known receiving wallet. Status, pending confirmation. I put the phone face down on the desk and watched the timer. 9 minutes. Roman was in the yacht's VIP lounge right now, watching a loading circle spin on his laptop screen. a Russian crime boss and 3 armed men seated across from him, waiting for the confirmation notification that would arrive any second and would mean, to everyone in that room, that the partnership was real, and the money was real, and Roman was exactly who he had told them he was. 8 minutes. I thought about the bar, the 18-year-old Scotch, the way he had said asterisk to us, brother, with the exact same voice he had used the first time we closed a real client, and the second time, and every time after that, the voice I had heard so many times it had stopped registering as a performance. 7 minutes. I thought about the alley, the concrete, my own hand moving without my instruction. 6. I picked up my coffee and held it in both hands and watched the timer. And I felt something that wasn't quite peace and wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite grief. Something that had no clean name because it was all of those things occupying the same space at the same time. 5, 4, 3. Part 3. The Megayacht and the Syndicate. Roman had chosen the VIP lounge for the meeting because it was the most impressive room on the yacht, curved white leather. A recessed bar lit from underneath, floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over water that was black and still at this hour. The Monaco coastline reduced to a string of lights along the horizon. He had arranged for a specific bottle of scotch to be on the table when Alexei arrived. The same label the syndicate boss had been photographed with at a charity event 2 years earlier. A detail Roman had researched and deployed with the particular attention to impression management that had always been his most reliable skill. Alexei was 53, compact, dressed in the kind of understated clothing that very wealthy men wear when they want other people to know they no longer need to perform well. He had arrived with 3 men who positioned themselves around the room without being asked, and who had not participated in the conversation since sitting down, and who Roman had been carefully not looking at directly since the meeting began. The scotch had been poured, the terms had been reviewed, 50 million in dirty capital run through Roman's crypto infrastructure, cleaned across a series of exchanges, and emerged on the other side as legitimate holdings in accounts Alexei's organization controlled, in exchange for a commission structure and a guarantee of ongoing business, and the specific, implicit form of protection that came with being useful to people who had very direct methods of resolving problems with people who became useless to them. The good faith transfer, Alexei said. Not a question. He set his glass down with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had never once in his adult life been made to wait for something he wanted. Right now, Roman said. He opened his laptop. His hands were steady, which he was aware of and grateful for, because the rest of him was not entirely steady. And the 3 men around the edges of the room were not a detail he had fully priced into his own nervous system when he had arranged this meeting. He navigated to the proxy wallet interface. The balance displayed correctly 100,243,000 and change, exactly as it should. He had checked it 4 times since boarding the yacht that afternoon. The particular compulsive verification of a man who knows his credibility is constructed on a single number remaining stable. He entered the destination address for the $10 million transfer. He entered the amount. He moved the cursor to the confirmation button. Alexei was watching the screen with the focused, patient attention of a man who had conducted enough transactions of this nature to know that the moment of confirmation was the moment that mattered, and that everything said before it was negotiable and everything after it was not. Roman clicked confirm. The loading circle appeared. He had seen this circle hundreds of times over 5 years of crypto transactions, and it had always resolved within a few seconds. The time it took for the network to pick up the transaction from the mempool and begin the confirmation process. He watched it rotate once, twice, 3 times. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when several people are all paying attention to the same small thing. The circle rotated again. Alexei's phone buzzed on the table between them. He looked at it without picking it up, a single glance, the way men look at incoming information when they have people whose job it is to interpret it. One of the men at the edge of the room stepped forward and placed a hand on Alexei's shoulder, leaning down to show him something on a secondary phone. Alexei read it. His expression did not change, which was somehow worse than if it had. Roman was still watching the loading circle when the screen went red. Not a standard error display. The entire interface, the balance, The transaction history, the navigation panel, everything was replaced by a single full-screen alert in the deep red of a system-level emergency notification, the color that software uses when something has gone irreversibly, structurally wrong. Fatal error. Smart contract executed. Proxy tokens burned. Wallet balance, $0. Protocol Shiva initiated. Funds transferred to secured cold vault. Interpol's cyber division alert filed. Case ref Shiva 441. Red notice pending. Terrorist financing node identified. Roman read it twice. His brain refusing the information on the first pass the way a body refuses a temperature that falls outside its range of previous experience. The balance field confirmed it. 0. Not a display error. Not a sync issue. 0. In the permanent, immutable way that 0 means on a blockchain, where there is no customer service line to call and no reversal process, and no authority empowered to give anything back. He looked up from the screen. Alex was already standing. Part 4. The freeze and the red notice. In the apartment, the alert arrived on my secondary monitor at the same moment as the confirmation of the burn transaction on the blockchain Explorer. Both events separated by less than a second. The automated report to Interpol and the destruction of the proxy balance executing with the simultaneity I had written into the contract, specifically because I had wanted there to be no gap, no window, no moment in which someone on the other end might have time to move the funds somewhere the protocol couldn't reach. The cold vault update came 30 seconds later, a number resolving in a terminal window I had kept open for 6 weeks, changing from the placeholder value I had set during testing to the actual balance of the real funds. Every Satoshi accounted for. $100 million landing in a wallet whose private key existed nowhere, except in a sequence of words I had memorized 18 months ago and never written down anywhere. I sat with that number on the screen for a moment. Then I opened the blockchain Explorer on the secondary monitor and watched the burn transaction propagate through the network. 11 confirmations in under 3 minutes, each one making the destruction of the proxy tokens more permanent, each one closing another door on any theoretical avenue of reversal. By the 14th confirmation, it was as irreversible as mathematics gets, which is to say entirely and forever. I thought about what was happening on the yacht. Not with satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter than satisfaction and more durable. The particular feeling of watching a proof complete. What was happening on the yacht? Roman was looking at a screen that said 0, in a room with a man who had expected $10 million and received instead a red notice classification, and 3 bodyguards who understood, before Roman had finished processing the information, that the value of Roman's continued existence had just undergone a significant downward revision. Alexei's financial analyst, monitoring the transaction from a secure location in St. Petersburg, would have seen the Interpol flag before the burn transaction even fully confirmed. The automated report system I had built into Protocol Shiva was designed to generate and transmit the intelligence package in the first seconds of execution, because I had wanted the law enforcement notification to arrive before Roman had time to board a tender and leave the yacht. The red notice request would move through Interpol's cyber division within hours, routing to the Coast Guard jurisdictions covering the Mediterranean and triggering a vessel identification flag on anything matching the yacht's registration. Roman would have explained that it was a glitch. He would have said the word glitch more than once. In the particular escalating frequency of a person deploying a word they know is inadequate and choosing it anyway because the alternative is telling the truth. He would have pulled up the wallet on his phone to show the balance and seen the same red screen and tried a secondary device and seen it again. And by then Alexei's expression would have completed whatever transition it was in the process of making, from the careful neutrality of a man conducting business to something that had no interest in maintaining appearances. I didn't need to see any of it. I had written the code. I knew how it ran. The Coast Guard cutter found the yacht 12 nautical miles off the Monaco coast at 3:40 in the morning, responding to the vessel flag generated by the Interpol notification. The boarding was logged in the Maritime Incident Report I obtained later through a Freedom of Information request. 16 Coast Guard personnel, 2 Interpol liaison officers, one representative from Europol's Organized Crime Division. They found the VIP lounge in a condition the report described, with the specific restraint of official documentation, as consistent with a physical altercation. Roman was located in the yacht's lower deck, in a condition the report described as requiring immediate medical attention, which I understood to mean that Alexei's men had had approximately 3 hours between the moment the screen went red and the moment the Coast Guard boarded. And they had used that time in the specific way that people use time when they believe someone has cost them $10 million and brought international law enforcement to their boat. Roman was airlifted to a hospital in Nice. He was simultaneously the subject of an active Interpol red notice for terrorist financing, which meant that his hospitalization was under law enforcement supervision, which meant that his discharge, when it came, weeks later after the surgeries, was into the custody of French authorities who had already received the extradition request from 3 separate jurisdictions. Alexei and his organization were not charged. There was insufficient evidence connecting them to the specific transaction, and the Interpol report I had generated named only the proxy wallet addresses, which were definitively linked to Roman's devices. This was not an accident. I had designed the report parameters carefully. I closed the blockchain explorer. I closed the terminal. I sat in the dark for a moment longer and looked at the apartment I had come back to 6 weeks ago with a headache that had not fully resolved and a medical debt I had not yet opened the envelope on and a 10-year friendship that had ended in an alley behind a bar. Then I opened a new browser window, navigated to my bank's wire transfer interface, and submitted a payment for $212,000 against the hospital account, which cleared immediately. I packed a single bag. Laptop, hardware wallet, 3 changes of clothes, the medication I still had 4 days of remaining. I left the medical debt envelope on the kitchen counter, empty now, because I had shredded the statement after the payment cleared. I turned off the monitors one by one, the apartment going progressively darker as each screen died, until the last one went and the room was entirely black. I stood there for a moment in the dark. Then I picked up my bag and walked out into the night, and I didn't look back at the apartment, and I didn't think about Roman in a hospital bed in Nice with a Europol officer outside his door, and I didn't think about 10 years, or a garage, or an 18-year-old Scotch raised between 2 people in a bar, one of whom had meant what he said, and one of whom had not. I thought about where I wanted to go next. The blockchain didn't hide his crimes. It broadcast them to every international intelligence agency on Earth, and locked him in a cage he was never getting out of. I walked to my car in the quiet of a city that had no idea any of it had happened, got in, and drove toward the highway and the open dark beyond it. $100 million in a wallet no one else could touch, and the rest of my life entirely ahead of me.